Good evening, everyone. I am Kristen Hovius from SEL Chicago, and I wanted to join you tonight to talk about building routines in an authoritative way. I am also building my skills in these webinars and webinar recordings. So thank you very much for your patience. I'm sure that since this is the first one I'm going to do, I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm enjoying learning, and it is an opportunity for me to see what other skills I need to build as I develop these skills to serve you better. In this time of uncertainty with schools closing for the safety of our children and all of our population, I wanted to make sure to continually connect to build what is this thing called authoritative leadership. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once I bring the slides up. Let me figure out how to do that. I think it's this button, and there it is. So, co-creating routines with authoritative leadership. What we are doing with this is having an opportunity to really see what is the way to share power with our children so that they can build the skills of self-regulation, of responsibility, of resilience. And this time that we may have with our children to care for them while their schools are closed and while we're practicing this thing called social distancing, I'm also really clear that I like to think about it as this thing called physical distancing, because human beings are social creatures. We need each other. And during this time, we can really connect with our children. I have no idea how to continue the slide on, so let me figure that out real quick. There it is. So if I do this and I start this from the beginning, there we go. Oof. Maya Angelou said, without courage, we cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. We can't be kind, true, merciful, generous, or honest. I'm sure she did not mean anything about creating a webinar from scratch and not knowing what you're doing. So I had some courage to do this as well. Thanks for your patience with my learning. The work that SEL Chicago has its tenets based in is the work of positive discipline. Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikurs are the believers and the first proponents of this work of individual psychology. Jane Nelson wrote the work Positive Discipline in 1983, wanting to use the work of Rudolf Dreikurs called Discipline Without Tears. It wasn't available, so she created this amazing book. And it works on this idea of behavior is purposeful. So there's a reason that children do things, and that reason is because all human beings have a drive towards belonging and significance. And when we don't have belonging and significance, we act in what Dreikurs called one of the 4 mistaken ways. We won't go into that in this podcast, but we will be doing that at another time. The misbehavior or any behavior comes from the private logic of the individual, what we perceive, how we interpret those perceptions, what we create, the beliefs that we create about self and others. And then our behaviors are based on those beliefs, whether they serve us or whether they really challenge us. Dreikurs also and Adler also believed in this thing called Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which is a word that Adler coined. It means, loosely translated, community contribution. We're born to contribute. We want to contribute to the world. Adler, Nelson, and Dreikurs also believe that mistakes are opportunities and that we do better when we are encouraged versus discouraged. We also believe that authoritative tools are kind and firm at the same time. Other contributors, Ross Green says we're all doing the best we can with the skills we have, which I like to think about as As we move into this time of cocooning with our families, if we can, if we have the privilege to do so, and certainly that is a privilege, then we are all going to be doing the best we can with the skills we have. If you are not trained as a teacher, then for you to expect to be a perfect teacher while your child is with you and out of school is probably not something that's likely to be possible because you don't necessarily have that skill. Um, so all of our skills are growing. Bruce Perry said that skill level is based on development and developmental difference, attachment, whether we have a secure, insecure attachment, and our trauma history, whether we have any trauma that's in our lives has been resolved or whether it's still lingering there for us. And Dan Siegel says that building new skills is always possible. We're not talking deeply about this, but I want to share with you just this idea that the misbehavior that we see is possibly the child's communication and the child's solution to a problem that the adult may not see. So if your child is struggling with homework about a particular subject, there may be his or her or their way of saying, I don't understand this, and I'm too embarrassed to ask for questions. And when we can stay curious about their misbehavior, instead of taking it personally, we have an opportunity to connect. I also just want to start right up front to say that some of the systems that I talk about with authoritative leadership really ask us as adults to reframe the behavior, which is a mindset shift and a cultural shift because children are often punished for behaviors that might be developmentally appropriate or appropriate for their developmental difference, or they're just struggling and their way of telling you that they're struggling is really, really hard for us. So this idea that we can shift our lenses into reframing that their misbehavior might be a communication is something to step into and lean into as you're discovering this work. All right, you're here, co-creating routines. So what does this look like? Thinking about how we are going to approach a morning before we need to get out of the house, or an evening before we need to go to bed, or that time in between people when they are going to school or coming home from school, or a whole day of leading, learning, and living in close quarters. Co-creating routines can be a really powerful way. So the pre-work for you as the adult to think about this is to think about listing the things that you want, that you want to do for a certain period of time, and listing the things that you need to do. So I just noticed that there is a challenge in my slide, so I'm going to escape, see if this works. I'm going to change. Oops, screen sharing stopped as the window is closed. See if this is still up, but there it is. And I'm going to share my screen again. I do not know. There's share the screen. It's done. Okay. I don't know how to edit this thing, so it's a one-stop shop today. But I do want to fix this. So know the list of what you as the adult need to do. And let me put the in bold and italics. Know the list of what you as the adult. There it is. There's things that we need and things that we want. And sometimes our children don't know the difference with that either. So, okay. Thanks for being with me while I figure this out. So our pre-work, back to that. Know the list of what we as the adults need to get done. Need to leave the house. We need to leave the house on time. We need to consider that this is a need if we want to continue to build relationships of trust with our children. we need to leave the house with everyone's dignity intact. So that's knowing the list of the things that we need to do. What are the things that we want to do for that certain period of time? We can put that in. We have that already either journaled out on a piece of paper. We don't necessarily need to share that with them right away, but that will help us create the list of the things that we want to have on our end routine chart. Then using this tool called curiosity questions. This idea of what, how, what are we going to do? How are we going to do that? When are we going to do that? Where might we do that? Those are really helpful routines, curiosity questions for routines. Notice that why is not there. We can talk a little bit later about why may not be there. So the curiosity questions for the children. In our time for going to bed, in our time for getting out of the house in the morning, in our time for working on this in this morning, what are the things that we have to do? Making that list, even scribing for that list on the separate pieces of paper, as it says right here, right there, can be really, really helpful. And then in that same time period, you may want to ask the question, what are the things that you want to do? And if we had all the time in the world, those are the things that you'd want to put in. Have those listed. And again, each on little individual pieces of paper. If you cut up, take a 8.5, 11 sheet of paper and cut them into an inch or inch and a half pieces, making those individual things on separate pieces of paper and putting them onto a table. Then having the child put them into a possible order. Now notice what this does when we do this. What this does is allows the skill of creative problem solving. It allows the skills of organization and executive functioning. It also really shares power. And when we share power, we're building relationships. We are sharing with our children that we trust them, that their contribution matters, that they have an opportunity to contribute. So it may seem really, really small and insignificant or unimportant. It's a really important skill. Ask them to put them into an order. And then agree to try it for a period of time and set a check-in date for when you might process or when you might make changes. In a day like on a normal school week, you may want to think about putting this into practice on a Saturday morning or on a Sunday afternoon, sometime when you're not leaving the house, and put a routine together for a morning. If you want to build a routine for nighttime, doing it not at nighttime is really, really helpful because there's no agenda to get either out of the morning. There's no hurry, there's no rush. And sometimes we don't always have our best conversations and we're not always at our most curious when we're hurried. It's also really helpful to check in after a certain period of time and say when you're going to check in. Then, let's say the routine's not followed. What might be helpful? What if instead of telling the child, it's now time to do this, or do this now, we could ask the child, what's next on your routine chart? And if the routine chart has been co-created, if the routine chart is somewhere visible where the child might need it or might be able to see it when you need it, it can be really helpful with those two things intact to then just say, what's next on your routine chart? And say nothing else. See what happens. What might this look like in action? So these two are examples from an actual classroom, right? What are the routines that are happening in math workshop? This recess expectations is actually something that would be put together in agreements, co-created agreements about how something might get done. So then you can check in again about an agreement of how something's going to get done and make some actions there. And then this other piece is something that um, one of the positive discipline trainers who runs Teaching for a Better World just posted on her Facebook page as a routine that she put together. That was the routine for herself as children are home with parents, what she was going to do for her day. And it just looks delightful. So at this point, I want to, let me do the stop share button. These are gentle tools from in gentle suggestions, but they build up over time. They're scaffolded over time to think about building together agreements, routines, meaningful work. We're also going to be looking at self-regulation and communication. Into the notes, wherever I post these, I will post links to the blog posts that support this. And I will also post links to some handouts to help you create these at home. My deep wish is that I hope this was helpful. Things are trying right now. This is in March of 2020. It's March 16th. And for Chicago, it's the last day of school. We are on break for 2 weeks, and I'm hoping that 2 weeks is all it takes. But in the meantime, I want to put these together and offer you these suggestions as an opportunity to use this time to build a foundation for your family that is deeply mutually respectful and intentionally created. Have a wonderful evening.